went to the ambassador's club.
Yeah, me too. I like clear.
Oh yeah. Julie, my sister grew up there. Yeah, they just went to South Florida. They were very close to being I got close to it.
So we are expecting really great weather. We should actually have a sitting as far away as possible. Yeah, no, we will not. Hi, I'm Maureen. Hi, I'm Maureen. I'll be covered.
Thank you.
How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Good to see you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Long time.
That's been a while.
That's right.
I'm standing in circles about our president.
Yeah, that's fair. Question for you. Because you're the person who made the Constitution of Iraq and helped with the people say that, why are they Muslim constitutions per se? And why can't Israel be a democracy? And I also say, why how it can be there's always reaction Obama not even. And my answer is nobody said
What the problem is, if through the democratic processes, there's a majority of Muslims, then they can't preserve, because well, what will happen is the majority will elect whatever they want and change the Constitution.
so that's so I'm on the right track. So it's nothing to do with.
And they could make it before that happens. Change their institution. But eventually, they're going to be outvoted, and that's really the flip. Would they allow themselves to be outvoted? And if they don't, then they come into
That's what my understanding. I just want to make sure I.
and it's just the demographics are otherwise, Israel become, but
That's what happened in India and Pakistan when partition was there. All of the Hindus, yeah, they did a and they gave equivalent amount of no, of course.
People say that the turnout actually you really are like saying who's that?
but none of the people who moved went from India to Pakistan, and they left their property because they couldn't sell their property. When they left their property, they gave it to the government. Then the government
I'll be covered.
Yeah, it's coming in a little. And I'm back in this, yeah. I know. No, I wish I could say some exciting stories, but I haven't done anything. Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's sort of good timing of stuff, I guess. Yeah. Right, that was right, maybe he could surprise us here. Happening. Yeah, well, I can't. I know. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, it's supposed to overflow. No. Hey, oh. Yeah.
Wherever you guys would like.
Yeah, absolutely. Our moderator's not even here. Actually, you can go straight up there and then to the right all the way down. No. Donald Trump. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Always like to be able to use his own words against him.
Yeah. Tell me when you want to start. I guess Bill.
Jessie and
Oh.
No.
That's crazy.
What?
I was wondering maybe that's what he's doing.
I was going to try and get out of the way, but I'm happy to sit up here.
Very exciting.
I told my
an overcall.
You're right. But now,
Oh yeah. Good, smart question. Make sure you get a seat.
yeah. Other than that, it's okay. Well, I woke up early. The topic.
Ways that we could yes. I know. I wish
Schools are watching something. They're not watching.
the reason we're watching the library. Was at the sessions here. You're back. Okay. The sessions here last week. Had a client
All right, why don't we get started?
I'll go all the way down.
I will let them know.
Are there four of us?
Yeah. David, go ahead.
Hi.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Siddiq. On behalf of the faculty and the staff and the community of Case Western Reserve University School of Law, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's event. I'm Michael Sharp. For those of you who don't know me, I am one of the two co-deans of this law school. Jessica Berg, the other co-dean, is down in Florida recruiting students for next year's class.
Thank you very much.
So this is a wonderful turnout, right at the beginning, the first day of the new semester, and what exciting times. But of course, you know what the Chinese say about exciting times. I think a lot of us are very nervous about what comes next, and this law school has committed itself this week to having a series of panels. Today's panel about what Muslims can expect from the Trump presidency. And then tomorrow at 4:30, same time, same place, the international economic policy under the Trump administration. And then on Friday, our students, the Student Bar Association, has organized an afternoon-long teach-in which there'll be a whole number of panels and breakout sessions trying to allow the students to discuss with the faculty what this new administration may mean for all of our lives. This is part of a very robust lecture series and conference series that we have every year. How many of you have been to other lectures and conferences at the law school? All right, so you're all regulars. Some other stuff that's coming up, just to whet your appetites for the semester. On March 3rd, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., we have the second annual Human Trafficking Law Symposium. And I'm very excited to tell you that the Attorney General's Office of the State of Ohio has just given us $820,000 to renew our human trafficking program, which is a pilot project that is nationwide and includes these conferences. On March, sure. At 4:30 on March 9th, we have the Klatsky Lecture on Human Rights, which is also relevant to this topic. We have Michael Posner, who is the former Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, will be coming here. He's also the founder of Human Rights First, one of the foremost lawyers NGOs for human rights, and he's going to be a great speaker. And then on March 30th to 31st, we have a conference sponsored by our Canada-U.S. Law Institute on the state of our nation's Canada-U.S. perspectives on law, policy, and politics in tumultuous times. They actually scheduled this and came up with the topic back in June, right after Brexit, and they had no idea how tumultuous things might be. Well, you will be hearing more about that today. I'm going to turn this over to Professor Avi Cover, who is one of our most wonderful professors. He runs our Institute for Global Security Law and Policy, and our faculty voted him tenure a couple of months ago, so he's going to be with us forever, which is fantastic. And I'm going to turn it over to Avi for the rest of the program. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We are about 43 and a half hours away from the Trump presidency, and it seemed particularly important for us to hold an event regarding issues of a Trump administration and Muslim civil liberties, given that he has made that discussion topic a focal point of his campaign. His advisors and he have been quite outspoken on security measures that should be taken with respect to the Muslim population, citizen and non-citizen alike. I want to give, before we begin, a special thank you to the American Constitution Society, which is co-sponsoring this event. The American Constitution Society is an organization of progressive lawyers who believe that the law and policy should be a force to improve the lives of all people. It's a network of lawyers, law students, judges, and policymakers working to create positive change by shaping the debate on vitally important legal and constitutional issues. And it has had a number of panels and discussions throughout Northeast Ohio on many relevant topics. I want to especially thank Andrew Cohn, who's also a graduate of this law school, who was really an important force behind making sure this event happened. And so thank you, Andrew. Donald Trump has made many comments on issues of the treatment of Muslims. He does not speak on a blank page of American history. And so we will get into a discussion of some of that history, some of those policies that have not always treated minorities so well. Most famously and infamously, there is the Korematsu case, which is in some of your CLE materials, and some of you are probably, no doubt, familiar. It's worth remembering that in World War II, the way in which American officials spoke about Japanese may sound eerily similar. No less a leading civil liberties light than Earl Warren, then the Attorney General of California, said that while it was relatively easy to find out which Germans or Italian Americans were loyal, it was simply too difficult to determine which Americans of Japanese ancestry were loyal and which were not. Warren said, quote, "There is more potential danger among the group of Japanese who are born in this country than from the alien Japanese who were born in Japan." Other government officials, in particular General DeWitt, emphasized it makes no difference whether he is an American citizen, he is still a Japanese. We must worry about the Japanese all the time until he is wiped off the map. And he said, a Jap is always a Jap. And the court ruled 6-3 that the internment of over 112,000 Japanese was indeed justified based on the military's determination that, quote, all citizens of Japanese ancestry be segregated from the West Coast because, quote, the disloyal members of that population could not be precisely and quickly ascertained. A congressional commission on wartime relocation and internment of civilians found the broad historical causes which shaped these decisions of Japanese internment were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan offered an official apology for that internment, providing restitution of $20,000 to every internment survivor, and said, "Here we admit a wrong." After 9/11, there were government measures aimed with respect to Arab and Muslim immigrants. Just today, oral arguments were heard in the United States Supreme Court about the detention of Arab and Muslim citizens who were held there, their only wrong being that they had committed immigration violations. They were held in connection with suspicion of terrorism. None of them were found to have committed acts of terrorism, and yet they were subjected to abuse and held months on end. And there are, of course, programs such as the Guantanamo military naval base. And there were, in fact, registry programs, which we will get into in just a moment. So it is not a clean slate on which Trump writes or speaks, and I want to just hear a couple words of the soon-to-be President of the United States that we can all understand some of what he has had to say, which we will get into in just a moment. So it is not a clean slate on which Trump writes or speaks, and I want to just hear a couple words of the soon-to-be President of the United States that we can all understand some of what he has had to say. There's a tremendous hatred, which we will get into in just a moment. So it is not a clean slate on which Trump writes or speaks, and I want to just hear a couple words of the soon-to-be President of the United States that we can all understand some of what he has had to say. There's a tremendous hatred, which we will get into in just a moment. So it is not a clean slate on which
Technology. Whatever happened to the easel and magic?
Yeah, but then people would forget their pens.
Right. Yeah.
You want to hold off on that? I can still quote a few of his remarks. Well, let's let it go. Some of you may remember some of these are direct quotes. In December of 2015, shortly after the San Bernardino shooting, Donald Trump campaign issued a press release stating, "Donald Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on." When there was talk about the administration no longer targeting people based on religion, but on country, he quoted, I quote, "I actually don't think that that is a rollback. In fact, you could say it's an expansion. People were so upset when I used the word Muslim. Oh, you can't use the word Muslim. Remember this. And I'm okay with that because I'm talking territory instead of Muslims." And he said, "I would certainly implement a database to track Muslims. Absolutely. They have to be legally required to register. They have to be." And it was with that backdrop, we don't know everything that, of course, this administration will implement, that I turn it over to my esteemed colleague and Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and constitutional scholar, Jessie Hill.
Thank you, Avi, and how great to see this standing room only crowd for this event. I am here just to moderate this panel, so I'm going to begin by giving just very brief introductions in the interest of getting to the presentations of our panelists, and then I will sit down again. I'm going to start on your far right here. We have Judge James Carr, who is a judge on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio. He has taught at various law schools around the state and also served on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in Washington, D.C. Next to Judge Carr's right is David Leopold. He is a principal with David Wolf Leopold and Associates, and he is a nationally recognized immigration attorney and immigration reform advocate, and he has also taught in the area of immigration law. Then to his right is Fareed Siddiq. He is a financial advisor and has been with Morgan Stanley for 35 years, but is also very active with a number of groups, including the Red Cross, the Diversity Center, and the Cleveland Council on World Affairs, and he is a frequently sought-after commentator on Pakistan. And to his right, finally, is my colleague, Bob Strassfeld, a professor of law here at Case Western. He teaches courses in the area of foreign affairs and national security law, among many others. And he has written on articles on the Vietnam War and is a legal historian as well. So I will turn it over.
No.
Oh.
We have a moderator.
We
who
have a
will
moderator.
Give us an order.
I thought maybe we could start with Judge Carr, actually. Would you like to? Or,
Among the subjects will be the recently terminated program of registering aliens coming into this country and leaving this country, and others will talk about that. I think unquestionably and most understandably, many immigrants, particularly those Muslim immigrants, are apprehensive about what the government can and is doing in terms of surveillance in the name of protecting our country against foreign-based terrorism. I will try to speak very briefly because time is very short with a couple of points about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I'm sure all of you have heard of that institution, and which really came to public attention after the Snowden disclosures, and also concurrently of great public concern. One thing I want to emphasize is that to the extent that there's apprehension that that court is either a rubber stamp or is somehow outside the operation of the Constitution and laws of our country, that would be a mistaken apprehension. The court consists of 11 district judges appointed for up to 7 years by the Chief Justice. And basically, it is authorized to issue warrants to conduct searches of really any kind, of individuals, of premises, electronic searches, and any kind of search imaginable, but only upon a showing of probable cause to believe that the subject of that search is working on behalf of or an agent of a foreign-based terrorist organization or a foreign-based government. In other words, has both a counterintelligence and counterterrorism purpose. It sits ex parte, its proceedings are secret, but I think the one point I want to make is that under the statute expressly, the court is prohibited, and the government is also prohibited from seeking, but the court's prohibited from issuing warrants that would have the effect of adversely affecting the First Amendment freedoms, particularly, of course, freedom of religion. And that is a requirement that is quite candidly honored, both by the government. One final point I'd like to make about the process is that a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court warrant or order cannot be obtained by simply the U.S. Attorney here in the Northern District of Ohio at the request of, let's say, the FBI or other agency. Unlike an ordinary search warrant, which simply goes to a U.S. magistrate and can be issued, it has to go, it has to be approved both by the FBI headquarters or whichever agency is involved. And there's an internal department within the Justice Department that vets the applications. And I know from personal experience, and I know that this practice continues, there are many, many instances in which that unit declines to authorize the application to be presented. Then it is submitted to the court at least a week in advance of the attendance of the judge assigned to hear that particular application. In other words, and who that judge is going to be is an absolute secret. In other words, the Justice Department cannot judge shop. It has to simply luck of the draw. During that week period, a cadre of legal advisors who are skilled and experienced in national security law, counterterrorism law, all aspects of the Fourth Amendment, review and vet the application. And at that point, a fair number of those applications never go forward to the judge because that group of legal advisors makes clear that they have questions about the propriety of the application, either under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act or under the Constitution, in which case the application is not presented. Unfortunately, I think that process and those turndowns are not a matter of public record in terms of the frequency with which they occur. But then and only then is the application presented to a judge. A hearing is held. Both the agent responsible for the investigation and a representative of the Justice Department are present. And once again, the thing I want to emphasize is a probable cause, just as it must be for an ordinary search warrant, has to be shown for the court to issue a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant or a FISA warrant. All of this statute lies at the crossroads and intersection of the Second Amendment, or the second Article 2, the President's responsibility to protect us against foreign threats of all kinds, and also the Fourth Amendment. And perhaps at some point I can talk a bit more about that, but I've used up more time than I should have. I hope I've given you some background. I'm more than glad to answer whatever questions I can before or after the session. So, I mean during or after the session, but I think we should move on to other.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to be. I'll be brief as well, so we have time for questions. So, it's almost like being on a merry-go-round and coming full circle, because after 9/11, I feel like we've been through this before. After 9/11, about a year after 9/11, exactly to the day, September 11th, 2002, the government introduced what was called NSEERS, the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, NSEERS. And at first, what it was a system by which individuals from 5 different countries, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Syria, were registered at the port of entry into the United States when they came in. And they were registered, they were interrogated under oath, and they were also told to report 30 days later if they remained in the United States, and they had to leave at designated departure ports when they left so that they could out-register. They all received what was called an FIN or a FIN number. Okay, and as the weeks went by, a few weeks later, it was expanded to what we call domestic NSEERS, or domestic registration. And that included people from 25 countries, which were predominantly Muslim countries, with the exception of North Korea. And under that system, non-immigrants, meaning people who are temporarily in the country, not permanent residents, not green card holders, had to come in and register, as well as people who had come in and fallen out of status. So they had to come in, they were given very short windows, 2-week periods as I recall, and it wasn't all rolled out at the same time. It was rolled out over a series of weeks. So the regulations would come down and we'd see, okay, Jordan or Lebanon or whatever are now designated. A week later, 4 more countries would be designated. So it sounds like it was coming out in an orderly fashion, but if you're a non-citizen in the United States, you have no idea when your country was called for registration, number one. And number two, the dissemination of information. Remember, this is 2002. No Twitter, no Facebook. Yes, there was computers and stuff, but I feel like I'm talking about the dark ages. But seriously, information didn't move around like it does now. And so many people who had been in this country working legally, abiding by the law, doing everything the right way, suddenly found themselves out of status, because if you did not register, that was considered a violation of status. If you did not register willfully, you could be charged criminally. And those folks, also the internal people, had to leave at designated ports of exit. The problem with that was there were only a few designated ports of exit. So if you were, let's say, in Cleveland, you may not be able to fly out through the port that you had gotten your ticket in or come in on. So it was a very difficult program for people to adhere to. And some of the consequences of this program were as follows. First of all, it netted about 83,000 people over the course of its life, which was really practically about 2 or 3 years. Of those 83,000 people, 13,000 of them were put into removal or deportation proceedings, not 1, Not one. These are people who were netted because they had an immigration violation. They may have been working without authorization, or they had overstayed their visa for a day or something like that, or overstayed for a longer period of time. So these were simple immigration violations. These were not terrorist-related charges. And they were put in, 13,000 were put into removal proceedings. That meant families were split up, businesses were ended, and these are also people, including that were in compliance with the law, so it was a mix. Of the 83,000 people, not one terrorist conviction, not one. They did not find one terrorist. And think about it. If you're a terrorist in the United States, you're going to go in and register? I mean, it's laughable. And it remains laughable. This was the brainchild of a number of people, the most prominent of which is a guy named Chris Kobach. Chris Kobach is the Secretary of State of Kansas. He is a doctrinaire anti-immigrant restrictionist. He is, and I'm not embellishing, he is ties with some nefarious groups that have been designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as hate groups. And he actually was, you probably saw him on TV during the Trump parade of people who were going to be in his administration. Kobach was the guy that showed up and happened to show the papers under his arm to the media. And on those papers, it said domestic registration system. So the cue to the media was, we're going to bring this back. So what happens is President Obama dumps the regulation about a month ago. The regulation was dormant. They stopped using it. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General issued a report in 2012 saying this is useless. This is useless because we're not going to net anybody who's a national security risk. We have flight manifests. We have sophisticated biometric programs. We have other intelligence information. Internal registration doesn't do it. But nevertheless, there is discussion of them bringing it back. And the reason why it was dumped out of the regulation, why they canceled it, was because it doesn't end it. The Trump administration could come back and reissue regulations. They'd have to, the thing is now they'd have to go through notice and comment under administrative law, so it puts a roadblock in the way. It doesn't end it. A couple points, and then I'll let Fareed talk, was that the most ominous sign, you know, people say, well, Trump isn't going to do this, he's talking, you know. The most ominous sign that he is going to go back to this sort of direction is Kobach. He's appointed people who have this doctrinaire philosophy, and the appointment of Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. Jeff Sessions is another doctrinaire anti-immigrant restrictionist. The other point I wanted to make was there was a discussion, I think, when Avi spoke at the beginning about people being locked up on immigration charges and so on. We don't need sophisticated new laws to lock non-citizens up in this country. The way the law is written now, the way the regulations are now, the Attorney General of the United States can lock up pretty much any non-citizen he or she wants to and throw away the key. We're not talking probable cause, we're talking a much lower standard of an immigration violation. And when I say throw away the key, it's because the regulations are written so that if bond is set at $10,000 or higher, or they refuse bond, and the person then goes to a judge and gets bond, they can stay the bond until the Attorney General makes the decision. So people can be locked up. And if you go back to the Patriot Act, where people could be locked up under the Patriot Act, nobody was ever locked up, really, as far as I know, I may be wrong, on the Patriot Act, because they used immigration violations. It's very easy to lock somebody up in immigration violations. The other thing is, take a look, those of you who are law students and lawyers, take a look at INA section 212F when we talk about Muslim bans. The president, and this has been used by Obama, it was used by Jimmy Carter, it was been used by other presidents. The president can stop the issuance of visas if he makes a determination that the entrance of a certain group of people, I think the way it's written is in nationality form, would be detrimental to the United States. And that can be done by executive order. And I'll leave you with this thought, that two thoughts. Number one, people say, well, Trump says A, but he may not do it. He may moderate when he gets into office. The only thing we have to go with is his word. and we know what he's said, and I take him at his word. And on Monday, which apparently, according to Trump, is the first day of the administration, according to what he said yesterday, because he doesn't want the administration to get in the way of his partying on Friday, which is fine. But anyway, he's going to issue executive orders. We know he's going to issue executive orders on Monday. It's rumored, but we know we most likely will see something on border security. We may see a ban on Syrian refugees. So I'll leave you with that.
So actually, I'm going to go next. First of all, Avi, thank you for demonstrating a tactic of resistance of just a loop of talking over. Oh geez, I wanted to let anyone who's interested in this teach-in know that it's actually not just the afternoon. It will start at 9 a.m. on Friday morning here in the moot courtroom and run all day, and everybody is invited. So when I talked with Avi about what I might talk about, it was sort of a grab bag, which probably ensures that I'll say a lot signifying little about too many things. But he asked me to start with Korematsu. You know, the question is, why are we talking about this incredibly discredited case all these many years later, and does Korematsu matter? And I think I have both some good and some bad news about that. So why are we talking about Korematsu? Well, other people have raised Korematsu recently. I mean, Avi gave you the gist of what the case is about. I will tell you a bit more about it, but in what context? So first, in the context of state resistance to resettlement of Syrian refugees, and you see local politicians in a number of locations saying, yeah, we're not going to have them, and if we're going to have them, we're going to just detain them in detention centers, and we can do that because that's what we did with the Japanese. More recently, many of you might have seen an exchange between Megyn Kelly and a person named Carl Higbee, who is the spokesperson for the Great American PAC, was a pro-Trump PAC, on the question of a registry of Muslims, in which Higbee said, well, of course we can do that. We have authority for that, the Japanese internment. Megyn Kelly reacted utterly incredulously. You don't mean to say that that's the basis that you're relying on, and he was unshakable. And remained so in his subsequent Twitter storm. So I am talking about Korematsu because apparently some people think that that is authority. And to be sure, it is a case that was never overturned. Fred Korematsu's conviction was overturned by a writ of coram nobis many, many years later, but the precedent still stands. So what is the Korematsu case about? It was one of 4 cases decided by the United States Supreme Court in 1943 and 44, Korematsu in 44, dealing with different aspects of Japanese internment. And the basic story, I assume most of you know. I will try to do this very quickly. In February 1942, President Roosevelt issues an executive order that authorizes the Secretary of War to prescribe certain military areas, and within those areas, out of a concern about espionage and potential sabotage of defense facilities, to exclude persons. To designate these people will be excluded. Congress, a month later, then passes legislation that criminalizes violations of those orders. And within days of that, General DeWitt, who was in charge of the Western Command, was protecting the West Coast, creates various curfews for Japanese and issues civilian exclusion orders. Those are supposed to work essentially within 7 days. These Japanese people are supposed to show up at evacuation centers for resettlement outside of these designated military areas. The orders applied not only to Japanese citizens who happened at the time to be in the United States. That's a category that's well recognized in times of war as enemy aliens, but also to American citizens of Japanese descent. And in fact, most of the people who were relocated were American citizens of Japanese descent. German and Italian Americans of, or let me put that in English, Americans of German and Italian descent, American citizens, were not similarly detained, although some German and Italian nationals were. The other cases dealt with, so Hirabashi and Yasui dealt with the curfew. The court upheld that. And then in Ex parte Endo in 1944, the court actually grants habeas relief to a Japanese citizen who was concededly a Japanese American who was concededly a loyal citizen of the United States. Korematsu's case involves his decision not to appear at a relocation center and instead to try to disguise himself as non-Japanese. And the court actually, through some fancy judicial footwork, actually doesn't. It says this isn't a case about internment, this is a case about the exclusion order, and in a 6-3 decision, as Avi described, concludes that the exclusion order does not violate Korematsu's constitutional rights. This is a decision written by Justice Black. Ironically, the court is inventing what we now do as equal protection jurisprudence in the Korematsu case. Justice Black says that, of course, discrimination on the basis of race would be unlawful, and if there was discrimination that seemed to be on the basis of race, it would have to be subject to a higher level of scrutiny than other challenges to government regulation. That looks like what we now do. He then proceeded to ignore the test that he announced, largely because he deferred to what the military described as the need for the exclusion of over 120,000 Japanese from the West Coast states and some southwestern states. The dissenters objected vigorously. Justice Murphy saying this is an endorsement of racism, and Justice Jackson saying that this creates an extraordinarily dangerous precedent and we should not have gone there. As I said, technically the case has never been reversed, but nevertheless, as the reading that we included from Noah Feldman says, Korematsu has become part of what is described as the anti-canon. Those cases that are considered so loathsome, like Plessy against Ferguson, like Dred Scott, like Buck against Bell, allowing eugenic sterilization in Virginia, that people will not invoke it. And as a consequence, I think there are two ways to think about Korematsu. Korematsu as precedent is a boogeyman, and we don't need to be apocalyptic in thinking that that is something that would ever be considered tolerable again. But the spirit of Korematsu, the underlying notion that in times of insecurity, whether it's times of war or times of insecurity, going back to racial classification and bigotry, that spirit, I think, is very much alive and worrisome. There is a saying, originally, it is from, I forget what Roman orator, that in times of war, law is silent. There is a sort of standard story, which I think is not sufficiently complicated, that says that essentially we panic, we throw our civil liberties away, and then we look back and regret, and we at least fix some of it. Our history is more complicated than that, and I would just suggest you think about some of the decisions during the Vietnam War where courts were willing to say, no, we're not going to throw these liberties away. And similarly, some of the reactions to the use of Guantanamo as attempt to use Guantanamo as a haven where habeas wouldn't go. So I don't think we are facing, I am not ready to frighten myself into thinking that we are facing internment camps. But what we do need to worry about, I believe, is other things that will happen in the name of this fear. And we included the decision in the Hassan against New York case, the case involving the New York Police Department demographic unit. I think issues of surveillance and the distrust that that will create and the fear that that will create are very real. And I hope that that's a good transition to you.
Thank you. My point that I would like to talk about is we are sitting in a law school. We have attorneys and lawyers and professors who are going to talk about the law much more and know a lot more than I do. My perspective is on a humanistic point of view. And I use the example that right now, there are not very many Muslim Americans who feel they are welcome in America. And that is a much more detrimental to what's going on in this country. My 12-year-old son woke up the day after the election and comes up to me and says, "Dad, we're screwed, aren't we?" So when a 12-year-old talk about that, and I met a gentleman earlier today who's talked about 6, 7, and 8-year-olds
they were crying that we are going to get deported out of this country. So when a 7, 10, 12-year-old kids are talking about those issues, it has a tremendous psychological impact on them for the rest of their lives. I happened to be lucky enough to meet Korematsu's daughter when she was in town a couple of months ago at the city club. And she talked about how it totally sapped the life out of her father going through that, and how it has impacted the children when they were growing up, how it has totally made them feel insecure where they need to feel secure. That to me is what's much more meaningful. And I take people at their word because we have to. We get sidetracked with all of the other things that are going on. And what Trump has said is not, he didn't come up with this, get rid of the Muslims or control the, it was in 2011. I'm sure most of you remember Terry Jones. He was the gentleman who pastor out of Florida who wanted to burn the Korans, and then the George W. Bush had to talk him out of it. And eventually he did, and so on and so forth. In 2011, he said that we are asking for the immediate halting of all Muslim immigrants. We are asking for the monitoring of all mosques in America. So this was the fringe right-wing, alt-right thought process going back years. So it is not something that Donald Trump came out. What has changed, there were people who were bigoted Islamophobic before, after 9/11, but even before that they were. But the reality is that it became okay to say that. When you have a policewoman who's wearing a scarf on her head, and they tried to burn it to a policewoman in New York City. When the pastor or the chaplain for the New York Police Department, it says, when I'm wearing my uniform, people come up to me and very friendly and so on and so forth. And this is, by the way, on NPR today, they had an interview of this gentleman. And when he's in civilian clothes, he goes through all kinds of problems going through the airports or other things. That's what I worry about. So legally we may, and the reality is that, I have great friends who are Jewish and other faiths, and they all say that if you guys have to register, we register with you. The reality is they don't have to ask us to register. They have all our biodata already. They will have a list put together and follow whoever they want to and not. So it won't, he may say it and do it just for political purposes, but in reality, that list, all of that information still exists. The Trump Attorney General designate Ashcroft, not Ashcroft.
Sessions. Please.
I know. Ashcroft, as David said, Ashcroft was a step up. So
That's right.
But in a non-binding resolution in the Senate that called for that there should not be any limited tests for people seeking to enter the U.S., he declined to participate in that. And in his hearing, he reaffirmed that position during his confirmation hearings. So these are the top legal person that Trump is using. In General Flynn, his chief national security advisor, calls Islam a cancer. He has surrounded himself with people like Bannon, who have been on alt-right and have become the spokesperson for the people who were afraid to be perceived as bigoted or racist or any of those labels, and he has made them okay to say and do. I have people who won't do business with me because they say, we don't know, you may be sending money to the terrorists. When an 8-year-old standing at a bus stop for the school bus, because the school bus, all the people from the neighborhood meet at one spot. He's afraid to go there because the other kids are calling him a terrorist. That's what I worry about. Those are the issues that we need to deal with. And it is very easy to say it is out there and it doesn't impact us. And I use the Trump as an example. At one point in 2015, Trump was asked how such a policy would differ from the laws in Nazi Germany that requires Jews to register. His reply was a flippant, "You tell me." And I hate to use Germany as an example because that is an extreme, but the point is that we may change the rules, laws, we can do executive decisions we can make, and it has an impact on a 3-year-old, it has an impact on a 100-year-old person, and that reflects throughout the family. And when a child feels insecure, there's nothing, and he feels there's nothing the parents can do to protect him, that is the horrible feeling to have as a parent and as a child. And it is sad in this day and age, and we have, as Judge Carr mentioned this morning on the WCPN radio station, that we have had a history in this country of putting down new people, new immigrants coming. But this is the 21st century. We should be beyond that. There is not a reason for 1.5 billion people to be put together in one lump sum and assume every one of them. When the Florida, at Fort Lauderdale Airport, the shooting took place, they're talking about how mentally ill he is. I believe most terrorists are mentally ill because they're distorting the religion to just take things that they want to feel is appropriate and use that to justify theirs. So they're mentally ill, but yet we want to associate all Muslims with the terrorists. And it is going to have long-term consequences in this country because it's going to make other people feel insecure, other people who are minorities. And that's what I want you to take away from today.
If I could pick up on that point, because I think it's an important one. First, I think all of us would agree that immigration is what makes this country better, more robust, more vital, and unique. An anti-immigrant outlook, unfortunately, though, is, I'm afraid, a part of our historical and cultural DNA. If you read David McCullough's The Mayflower, you will learn that the Pilgrims protested about the Crown allowing the Puritans to come into their paradise. You had the Yellow Peril scare in the 1880s. You had the Brahmins in Boston hated the Irish. I had a great aunt who recalled help wanted in the shop window, N period, I period, N period, A period, about 120 years ago. That meant no Irish need apply. The Irish hated the Italians. Father Coughlin hated the Jews. But what we are seeing today, I fear, and I think it is indisputably true, the anti-immigrant position is gaining greater respect and is more virulent than ever in our history. We have had episodes of it, but people have become assimilated. But the resistance, not just to Muslims, not just to people of Middle Eastern or other countries where Islam is a predominant religion. Keep in mind, our incoming president wants to deport 11 million people of Hispanic, of South American, Latin American descent. The same kind of virulent stirring up of the worst of human passions, hatred, fear, mistrust, suddenly is loose in our country in a way that I don't think any historian could say has ever occurred before. And I think Muslims in particular have a right to be apprehensive. I'm afraid that you are probably correct that all too many people in our country want Muslims to feel that they're not welcome and that they, quote, don't belong here. And I think it's our collective responsibility, all of us, every one of us in this room, unless those whose ancestors came in chains. Our ancestors, every single one of them, left where they came from because they weren't doing well. And that's exactly the same impulse that brings the immigrants who are getting off of planes in JFK and Detroit and Los Angeles here. I think we have to keep that in mind, and we have to cherish it, and we have to resist the kind of bigotry that suddenly, in some circles, on a national level, has become fashionable and, worst of all, acceptable.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I do want to get to questions from the audience. I'm sure there are a lot of them. I just want to also, kind of building on that, maybe throw out one more question to the panelists, which is to say, you know, in light of this kind of cultural climate that we're in right now, how much do we realistically think is likely to change, to actually change with the next administration? So you might point out that President Obama had a pretty sweeping or draconian deportation policy already. Fareed pointed out that the sort of tools of surveillance are already there. I'm not sure we even know how they're being used. I'm not sure how much the FISA court, for example, is sort of set in its operations or can be changed by an incoming administration. So what do we think is really kind of the nub of the matter going forward?
Let me give you one example. In 2003, the Justice Department issued guidelines prohibiting federal law enforcement from engaging in profiling. The Supreme Court has not made profiling, except in the most naked form, unlawful. I mean, in a case that is basically used in order to justify pretextual traffic stops, Wren, Justice Scalia said, well, of course, if the only reason you were stopping the car was because of the race of the driver, for instance, that would be unlawful. But if you have any other reason, then we're not going to inquire into why you pulled the person over. So a different Justice Department could easily turn around and say, we're just going to rescind that, those guidelines. That's one of many possibilities, I think.
Yeah, in the area of immigration, there's a tremendous amount that they can do, even on day one. Many of you have heard of the executive actions under President Obama. Some of them are caught up in the courts, but one in particular was not, and that's the DACA program. That's the Deferred Action Program for undocumented people who came as children, who came at the hands of their parents, and pretty much were raised here and are American in every way, other than they don't have the paperwork. And Obama didn't just do it, you're right. He had a kind of a sordid record of he was called the deporter-in-chief for a reason. But he was responsive, his administration was responsive to tremendous public pressure. Pressure from various circles, from the Muslim community, from the Latino community, from the Dreamers themselves, the undocumented youth themselves that were very well organized. And that's what led to this program. And now you have almost a million undocumented young people who now have temporary reprieve, temporary employment authorization. Many of them are getting their educations. Many of them are, and for the first time, they didn't have to worry about getting on a plane and being arrested or getting on a bus and being deported and that sort of thing. That could change and probably will change. He's probably going to drop that program. It's not clear how he's going to do it. But I think, so programs like that. But I think more broadly, President Obama, again, back to where he was pushed, he instituted 2 years ago immigration enforcement priorities, civil enforcement priorities, which he's supposed to do under the Homeland Security Act. And those priorities pretty much stopped the deportation of the millions of people who were not criminals who had been in the country a long time, who had U.S. citizen children, who had never done anything wrong, other than perhaps overstay a visa or be here. And by the way, it's not a crime to be in the United States without documentation in most cases. And in those enforcement priorities, he targeted people who had been convicted of serious crimes, people who had blatantly blown off the immigration law or disrespected it, repeated immigration violators, and national security risks. Now, what Trump can do on day one, I don't think he'll do it on day one, I think he'll maybe do it on day two, he could throw out these immigration enforcement priorities. He walked around for a year and a half talking about how he was going to deport all 11 million, as Judge Carr pointed out. Well, after the election, he says, well, now we're going to deport 2 to 3 million. Criminals, he says, criminals. The problem with that is that there aren't 2 to 3 million people who are non-citizens who would fit that profile. The Migration Policy Institute estimates that number at about 600,000, which is high, probably too high. But those people are already being targeted under the Obama administration. So when he says 2 to 3 million, what he's saying in code is I'm going to throw out the immigration enforcement priorities, because if you look at the appropriations to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to DHS, Department of Homeland Security, they are appropriated enough money to remove the equivalent of about 400,000 people a year. So if you're going to start deporting 2 to 3 million, what you're going to be doing is going after people who do not have criminal histories, who have been here a long time, who have worked hard, who have U.S. citizen family members, children, parents, et cetera, et cetera. Where does that bring us? That brings us back to chaos, which is where we were before these enforcement priorities were in place. I can name hundreds of cases where immigration would go in conceivably looking for somebody who was quote unquote a criminal, and then they would pick up whoever else was in the house. I had a case out of Paynesville, which turned out to be led to what we call the breastfeeding mother memo. Because what ICE did was they came into a house ostensibly looking for somebody on a criminal violation and found an undocumented woman who was feeding her child and pulled her away from the baby and arrested her. ICE was so embarrassed that they had to issue a memorandum saying, don't arrest breastfeeding mothers while they're breastfeeding. Make it really clear. But so, I mean, I don't mean to make this funny because it's not. We go back to immigration chaos. He can arguably put a Muslim ban on by calling it a ban on people from certain countries that are predominantly Muslim. I think there'll be litigation over that. I think the question of his power to do that will be tested every step along the way. Jeff Sessions, who will be in charge of the Department of Justice, most people don't realize this. The Department of Justice is the immigration court administratively. The immigration judges are not judges in the article sense. They are designees of the Attorney General. They are agents of the Attorney General. So Jeff Sessions has the authority, like I said earlier, to lock people up, but he has the authority, more ominously, to change the immigration law because he can change precedent decisions. He can change the asylum law. He can change the law that affect trafficking of women and children. He can change the law that affects relief from deportation for people who have been abused. And he can also streamline the immigration courts. We saw some of that under John Ashcroft. He can streamline those courts so that, you talked about it, there's a backlog of immigration judges. It takes now about 4 years to get a hearing. Rather than appropriate more money, what they can do is simply cut out the procedure. So there's a variety of things that can be done, and I fear will be done unless people of good conscience stand up over the next 4 years.
I'd just like to make one small point. If somebody had said to you in 2000 that we would be acceptable for United States government to kill one of its own citizens without due process, nobody would believe it. But that did take place. So the point I'm trying to make, when you make people fear for their lives, they will do anything they feel necessary. And when you combine and slowly keep dripping on them that these are the bad people, you can do anything to them. And without the good people to stand and behind and in front, it will be tremendously detrimental to the United States of America. The country that I have come and lived for 45 years, I see in front of me changing dramatically.
Let me talk for, and I will try to be brief, about the fear of surveillance. I think that that fear is an understandable fear. I think to fear unwarranted, literally, surveillance as a result of issuance of a FISA court warrant is misplaced. Keep in mind that practically every case in which defendants have been charged with, in one form or another, conspiring to provide material support to overseas terrorism, the evidence was gathered primarily, in most of those cases, by people working on behalf of the FBI, who had basically infiltrated and quite introduced themselves into, or two persons who were believed to be inclined to be supportive of or against the American efforts in the Middle East, and then very carefully instructed and controlled to avoid the potential defense of inducement or entrapment, in turn did induce persons to say and do things, principally say things, that provided the evidence that resulted in convictions of those terrorism, close quote, related crimes. Surveillance by ordinary individuals is totally unregulated in this country. You don't need a warrant. The FBI can put a body wire or microphone or a mini video camera on or near a person and record, except in circumstances when where the individuals have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And none of us here have that here. We have it under defined circumstances in the law. So it may be perhaps indelicate of me to say this, but I've said it twice during the sentencings of 7 individuals who were convicted of such crimes in front of me, 5 in one case and 2 in another. The message that I hope that I tried to express, I'll be very blunt about it, is that if somebody comes up to you and starts talking jihad this and jihad that, assume that individual is working for the United States government. Sound funny and facetious, but I mean it as seriously as I can. One case involving 5 persons who were convicted, the defense attorney eloquently and accurately said, take the FBI implanted informant, who was a Muslim. He was an African-American convert, former Green Beret, DEA informant, and they told the FBI this guy does good work. Went to a storefront mosque in Toledo. The 3 principal defendants knew each other slightly, probably not much better than you or I know each other. But he was, in the words of the defense attorney, and I think they were apt and perfectly descriptive, the hub of a hub-and-spoke conspiracy. Take him out of the case, to quote the defense attorney, and there is no case, there is no conspiracy. So I mean that very seriously. And in fact, other members of that mosque, a number of them called the FBI to complain about what this guy was doing and saying. So, I mean, and that's something totally extrajudicial, that over which there is no judicial oversight. There are regulations within the Bureau and other federal law enforcement agencies, but as David was saying, those regulations can be abandoned or changed or altered at the whim and instruction of the new Attorney General.
you. So I think we go till 6 o'clock, so we have some time for questions from the audience. Are there mics, or are we just? Oh, okay. 5:30? Were we supposed to wrap up?
So those who are here, they got their CLA credit, and they want to go, should please feel free to go. You are not offending any of the participants here. But we are going to continue for questions for those who I'm sure there are
Sorry, that's
many members of the audience who do have questions.
Great,
But
thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. This question may be for David, Mr. Leopold. I'm just curious, being a Muslim in this country, and I'm pretty worried about the future of myself, my family, especially my daughter who wears the hijab. What can we do as Muslims to defend ourselves legally if anything happens during the Trump administration? I mean, it's a really broad question, but I'm concerned about the things that could be obvious that I can stand up for. Do you have, anybody can answer that question?
Well, I mean, I think listening to what Judge Carr just pointed out, number one, know who you're talking to, but that applies to everybody. But I think knowing your rights, knowing who can come into your home and for what reason, how people can, I mean, is that what you're asking?
Well, I mean, let's say if there is something about similar to the internment of the Japanese.
Oh, I see.
I mean, they come and they want to round us up. I have told my friends and relatives that I'm not going to go easily. They have to either put me to sleep or kill me. But not many people of my family or of my community are willing to do the same thing. A lot of people are fearful. They hide in the basement. They don't speak about any political issues because they're afraid of being labeled of anything. So the question in here is that what kind of legal plans or issues that I can be aware of so I can protect myself, my community as well? Is there anything that we can do either in advance?
Yeah, organize. Organize. I mean, it's hard to answer a hypothetical like that. If somebody were to come to my house and say, look, you're going to a camp because you're a Jew, yeah, my reaction would be pretty similar to what you just pointed out. I think to protect ourselves, and I said this, we had a panel here shortly after the election, it's going to boil down to each one of us to look out for the other, each one of us to make sure that, if they're coming to your house and I know about it, that I take action. If they've taken you, that I take action. We need to we need to be organized for any kind of threat to civil liberties. Whether it's against a U.S. citizen, whether it's against a non-citizen. There's a piece that just came out on Medium that was written by a young dreamer that I know very well, entitled My Plan for My Deportation. And he pointed out things like, I'm probably getting too specific here, but, I know in the removal community, there's Facebook Live. There's nothing wrong, as the judge points out, there's no expectation of privacy. Facebook Live, who's ever coming to your house, whoever's approaching you in the street, who's ever trying to round you up, who's ever trying to arrest you. Now, there's constraints to that, obviously. You can't obstruct justice. You can't get in the way of performance of a lawful. But there's no reason why you shouldn't familiarize yourself with the tools of technology, tools of communication. Twitter is an amazing tool. Facebook, as you know, is an amazing tool. I guess what I'm really coming back to is organizing. We'd have to deal with each violation of rights as a specific problem, with its own issues and what the law is and what the defenses are but in general, I think be ready, be organized, know your rights.
Additional questions? Right here up front? Oh. Oh, in the back.
This is to any or all the people on the panel, and people have spoken very eloquently to some of the things that Trump may do when he comes to power.
I think he was just sworn in.
That's right. They don't want people to hear this.
Jump start.
Okay, can people hear me? And John Lewis started out by saying his ascendancy to power is illegitimate. And I want to ask people on the panel to speak, to speak to that. And Carl Dix and Cornell West issued a brief statement on why they think it is illegitimate. I'd like to read and have people respond to that. Why? Because Donald Trump has said that he is going to put the people in jail and deprive them of their citizenship for expressing political dissent. Because it is illegitimate to suppress the media. Because it is illegitimate to deprive entire sections of people of basic fundamental rights simply due to their membership in a particular group of people, starting with Muslims and immigrants. Because it is illegitimate to threaten an entire group or entire groups of people with suspension of the right against illegal search and seizure without probable cause, with the only probable cause being that they are black or Latino, because it is illegitimate to torture people and to punish the families of people who are suspected of crimes, because it is illegitimate to say that merely because a judge comes from a minority nationality, they should be disqualified from rendering legal judgment on Trump, because it is illegitimate to say that 5 black youth, the Central Park 5, who Trump basically baselessly accused of a crime, even calling for their execution in full-page ads in the New York Times, then 12 years later, when they were fully exonerated, Trump said that they should be kept in jail anyway, because it is illegitimate in some to institute a form of government that deprives people of their most fundamental rights. Everything here is what Trump has either promised to do or stated that should be done. So I ask people, if they haven't got it already, to take one of these eyes. And this is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, it stands for the illegitimacy of the Trump regime, but it also stands for supporting immigrants. So I ask people to take it and wear it. That's step one. And step two, make a video and post it on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And this is the challenge of standing up to Trump and what he represents.
The problem that I have, I mean, I think that's a political statement, and I may or may not disagree, but I think John Lewis, Representative Lewis, he has the moral authority to make a statement like that. I took it more as a political statement. There's no question in my mind that Donald Trump, when he's sworn in on Friday, will be the legal president of the United States, and I'm not going to question that. I revere our system. I do not agree with the election result, but I'm not going to, I do not like the election result personally, but it's not my place to say it's illegitimate. It is legitimate, even though, popular, but we can get in all those discussions. And I think it's also particularly dangerous to call him illegitimate as a president when that's what they used against Obama for 8 years. Whether it was, and it's what Trump used, whether it was his birth certificate, whatever. So I disagree. I think he is legitimate. He is he's going to be the legal president. I don't think there's any question about it. And I think that's why I am here. Because in this country, we have the right to speak out. We have the right to oppose. We have the right to organize and protect ourselves. If he does something that violates, like the Emoluments Clause, which will happen at 12:01, but if he violates, his sacred oath of office, then there's mechanisms to deal with that. But I got to disagree. I think it's a dangerous, slippery slope to get in there and start saying that Donald Trump is not legally the president. Of course he's legally the president.
Excuse me, I have a question. I'm Muslim international student here at law school in Case Western Reserve University. And to be honest with you guys, I have been here in the United States for almost 4 years, and I went back and forth to my country. There is nothing wrong with me getting back to the United States. But this is the first time when I get back from my country, I see, to be honest with you, I saw the fairness through my mother's eyes, because she didn't want me to get back because she cared a lot about my life. But you know what I say to my mother? I'm studying law. So I believe in American society as a nation of law. If they don't stand up for their law, the law they vote for, so there is something wrong with this great civilization. This is the first thing I would made clearly. The second thing, my question is that, as a Muslim international student, a lot of Muslim international students, they ask me, there is anything we should worry about so we can be in safe side? Because back in 2001, I know a lot of Saudian students, for example, I'm from Saudi Arabia, they lost their dream because they left the country because the fares increased and the government asked us to, anyone feels unsecure, he should have left the country. So, and the second, this is the first question. And the second question, do you think, Mr. Fareed, this is the time of extremist people on both sides? Thank you so much.
On the first part of that question, even before Donald Trump was elected, students have been always in F students, I don't mean grade-wise, I mean the student designation of the visa, F student, academic students, have always been in a precarious situation, and that's because of 9/11. There's a SEVIS program, and if you don't go to class and if you drop out, they will come and they will arrest you, and that has nothing to do with Donald Trump. That's been the way it is. Now, my experience, and I've represented a lot of Saudi students, particularly in this area, for a variety of reasons, and the difference between that, with a Saudi student, I'm talking under Obama, I'm not talking, a Saudi student likely is going to be detained if he or she violates their SEVIS, their student visa. Everybody will be arrested, but if you're not Saudi, if you're European, the likelihood is you would be released on a bond. If you're Saudi, you're going to sit in jail until you get a bond hearing. So my experience, it's anecdotal, of course, but I've seen that Saudi students have been treated much more harshly with respect to bond and detention issues. So go to school, go to class.
That's by immigration judges.
No, actually, that's by, good question. No, the immigration judges tend to release them.
Okay.
But what happens is the Saudi student will be sick or not go to school or for whatever reason, and they get arrested by, it triggers a SEVIS, which is a computerized program. ICE will come out and arrest them, and they'll detain them. They won't give them a bond. They'll lock them up in Tiffin, Ohio, and it takes almost a month or 2 months to get a bond hearing because there's no immigration
But a
judge.
2 hearing in front of
An
what kind of
immigration judge.
That's
Yes,
what I
yes.
thought. yeah.
Immigration judges at that point
Right.
will usually give a bond, but you end up sitting in jail.
Your question about extremism on both sides, I agree with that both sides are getting to the extremes. I use the example of when India was one country and we were trying to get British out of there. And Gandhi used a very interesting thought process. He wanted to use English laws to prove to them that what they were doing was wrong. And we in this country have been under that premise that majority of the American public won't let that happen. And what I'm finding in the last 17 years, that the drip of that they are bad people. And historically, in the Vietnam War, we called them gooks, the Japanese were called the Japs in the war, and so on and so forth. So we have a history of trying to give names and make them, so therefore it's easy to discriminate against them. That's what I've seen in the last 17, 16 years, that the society is changing to become less accepting and willing to see that we are better than that, than to get to that level. That we cannot, that they may come, a terrorist can attack and kill innocent people, but we won't do that because we are a civilized society. And that civilized society is changing. That's my fear.
And I think a major reason for it is Exhibit A myself. I don't watch Fox News. I watch Rachel Maddow. Okay? And vice versa. And the whole fake news issue, TV news is going the way of the newspaper, the broadcast media, the print media. And increasingly I suspect most of us in this room, get a lot of what we think is information and political view and commentary, off this little thing, or the iPad, or it's self-confirmation of the views that we have, and I think quite candidly, ultimately, it's collapse of the American educational system to produce people who are able to think critically. I would like to say a couple of things. One about what can you do in picking up and organize. Money knows no creed or color. Support the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Council. Support the ACLU. Support groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center, groups that will be beleaguered with requests and demands and needs for the only recourse ultimately that any of us will have. It's not at the hands of an illegitimate regime, but a regime that does illegal things, and that is the judiciary. And I took an oath, as every judge did, every public official, to protect, defend, and uphold the constitutional laws of the United States. And that's the business that the federal judiciary is in. Now, we don't do that business very often. I suspect we're going to be doing it a lot more often in the coming decade or so. But quite candidly, I like to think, and not just out of vanity and pride of being one of about 1,500 Article III judges in this country, but the simple fact is we may all have to rely upon the ultimate check on unrestrained authority, and that is our judicial system and our Constitution. And let's, as the Anglicans say, God willing, we and it will be strong enough so that this kind of conversation becomes but a bad memory and something of a distant past. Let's hope so.
So I think we have time for maybe 1 to 2 more.
Well, in response to the question on whether or not, what it is that people can do, I want to remind people that, of course, there are local politics and local institutions of government that can offer sanctuaries and protections. You've all heard what the position California is taking. Clearly, Cleveland, we still have a power vote. Voting locally is important. There are 3 elections coming up over the next 4 years. We have elections happening in Ohio. We can change the tide locally, and that can make a difference in terms of what positions your local government takes in the face of the federal government. And I think that could be a formidable form of resistance if people were to really engage in that manner. That's all.
I was hoping to ask briefly.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
If I might, you mentioned the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Council. I guess my greatest concern right now is that if the deportations do start or if Muslims or immigrants are targeted, that I won't know about it, that I won't hear about it somehow, simply because it's happening on the other end of the country or something like that. And yes, there's something like Twitter and Facebook, but those are easy to mislead or such. Are any of you aware of some sort of networks being set up that will alert people who are concerned about this sort of thing about what's happening or what's going on?
Yeah, I'm actually legal counsel to a group in Washington called America's Voice, which, for lack of a better way to put this, is the voice of the immigration movement. They will, once that starts, and they're at americasvoiceonline.org. So if you keep an eye on their website, or you keep an eye on the National Immigration Law Center, that's NILC, NILC.org, they will be on top of it. The American Immigration Council, council spelled like city council, AmericanImmigrationCouncil.org, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA.org, all of these groups will be on top of any kind of deportation force and highlighting specific cases. So the information will be out there, believe me. You'll hear about it. And so, but you're right, people can go and not be aware of it, so you have to be discerning and look for groups that you know can be reliable.
Especially since it may be possible that we'll see the media um, well, repression perhaps or exclusion of the media as time goes on here. If that gets to be the case, then we might not be able to depend on CNN or whichever outlet to keep us abreast of the situation. But thank you very much. I'll surrender the time.
Thanks. We're right at like 5:59 and a half. Do you have a quick intervention?
Quick comment. We are having this conversation because we lost an election. Not that things would have been perfect if the election had come out the other way, but we are having this conversation because of the results of an election. One of the things that we need to pay attention to is that elections matter. And let me leave this one point. The way to combat obnoxious government policies is to change the people who are in office.
Right.
Even while lawyers may fight the good fight in the short term, the way to avoid having continuing discussions like this for years to come is to vote the bums out.
And also, by the way, and to let them know in advance that you're going to do that. Seriously, let the Rob Portmans and the Bob Lattas, let them know.
Well, thank you all so much for coming, and thanks again to this wonderful panel for a really engaging discussion.
Of course, the gerrymandering, you think, talk about how much Hillary's popular vote, it's nothing compared to the popular vote for Democratic representatives in the state of Ohio.
Good journalists will wait and see what would happen. We need to learn from history and not repeat it. People talk about an election in 4 years. There may not be an election in 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely evil.
Well, actually, I agree. I think, quite clearly,
I think there is
there are not two circuits that retain Republican control.
And I think that's
which is a change. I mean, that's what happens.
I've been following him on Twitter.
Yeah, the Supreme Court.
Trump, I stand with John.